The arrival, the great alien city of Veloria, stretched out beneath the twin suns, its spires reaching toward the glowing skies. The air shimmered with colors unfamiliar to human eyes. Markets buzzed with alien voices, and glowing banners of the royal house fluttered above every tower. For centuries, no human had dared step foot on this sacred land. Yet today, one man walked through the gates under heavy guard. His name was Daniel, a lone human traveler who had come seeking only knowledge and peace. But the moment he crossed the threshold into Veloria, silence followed him like a shadow. Alien eyes widened. Whispers began to spread through the crowd. Some called him a trespasser, others whispered the word omen. The soldiers who escorted him kept their spears at his back, their expressions filled with suspicion. The path led him toward the towering palace of the alien royal family. The walls were carved from black stone that glowed with runes, each symbol pulsing with a soft blue light. Daniel felt the weight of every gaze upon him. He could not understand why his presence stirred such unease. He had come by invitation, or so he had been told, yet the air smelled of fear and hidden truth. When he entered the great hall, his breath caught. The chamber was vast, supported by golden pillars carved into the shapes of ancient alien warriors. At the far end sat the king, his robes lined with silver threads, his crown burning like molten fire. Around him were the nobles, their eyes sharp as blades. Their whispers filled the chamber, questioning who this human was and why he had come. But Daniel's gaze was not fixed on the king or the nobles. His eyes were drawn to her, the princess. She sat beside the throne, her posture elegant, her skin shimmering faintly beneath the light. Her features were striking, almost otherworldly. Her gaze had the power to silence even the noisiest court. Yet in this moment, her eyes widened as they fell upon him. For a heartbeat, the entire chamber seemed to stop breathing. The princess gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles turning pale. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Daniel did not understand, but he could feel the intensity of her stare. It was not just surprise, it was recognition. And that recognition shook the hall into whispers once again. "Why does she look at him so?" one noble hissed under his breath. "Could it be true?" another whispered, their voices carried. But none dared speak loudly enough to draw the king's wrath. The princess's reaction was enough to spark rumors dangerous enough to shake a throne. Daniel's steps echoed through the hall as the guards pushed him forward. He bowed respectfully before the king, but his mind was not on the throne. It was on the princess. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her fingers trembling as she held her gaze on him. He wanted to ask why, but the tension was so heavy he could hardly breathe. The king's voice boomed across the chamber, demanding silence. "You come into my hall, human? Knowing your kind are forbidden here, speak now, and tell us why you stand in my presence." His voice was thunder. Yet Daniel noticed the flicker of unease in the king's eyes as well. Even he had seen his daughter's reaction, and it disturbed him. Daniel opened his mouth, choosing his words carefully. He explained that he had come seeking truth, that he followed an ancient call, that he meant no harm. But as he spoke, the princess suddenly rose from her seat. Her chair screeched against the marble floor. Her voice trembled as she cried out, "No, he should not be here." Gasps filled the chamber. The king's face hardened, his crown glinting in the light. The nobles exchanged looks of horror and curiosity. Why would the princess speak against his presence with such fear? Daniel turned to her, his voice low but steady. "Why? What have I done?" But the princess did not answer. Her eyes shimmered with emotions too complex to name. Fear, sorrow, and something else, something she could not admit. The silence stretched like a blade across the room. Every eye was upon her, waiting. The king demanded an explanation, but she lowered her gaze, her lips sealed shut. The hall erupted into chaos. Some nobles shouted for the human's head. Others pressed the princess to speak. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons. Daniel felt the tension building like a storm about to break. He knew nothing of why he was here. Yet somehow his very presence had pulled a hidden secret into the open. And in that moment, as the princess's eyes met his once more, Daniel realized that he was not a stranger to her at all. He was part of something deeper, something she had kept buried for years. And now, with the court watching, her secret teetered on the edge of being exposed. The chamber grew heavy with silence. The princess's lips trembled, her eyes moist. The king leaned forward on his throne, his voice like a growl. "Daughter, what is this? Speak the truth." But she could not. Her eyes said it all, and in that unspoken truth, Daniel understood. The danger had only begun. The whispers of the court, the moment the princess's trembling words fell into the chamber. The entire hall shifted into a storm of unease. The silence that had once gripped the nobles turned into murmurs, low at first, like the buzzing of distant insects, but growing louder and louder until the voices filled the vaulted room. Their whispers slithered across the chamber like invisible serpents, curling into every ear and planting seeds of suspicion. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to rise above the king's authority, yet their voices could not be completely restrained, for the princess's reaction had been too strong, too sudden, and now the nobles began to weave stories from fragments they did not yet understand. "Did you see her eyes?" one noble whispered to another, his scaled skin rippling with unease. "They widened as if she had seen a ghost." Another alien with shimmering silver eyes leaned closer and hissed, "Not a ghost, but a memory, I tell you. She knows this human. She has seen him before." Across the chamber, an elder with wrinkled skin muttered to his companions, "It is said the princess once disappeared during her youth. She returned, but she never explained where she had gone. What if the human is the reason?" The whispers grew into an unseen tide, building higher and stronger with every passing moment. Daniel stood silently at the center of it all, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt so much scrutiny in his life. Every gaze was a blade, every whisper a weight pressing down upon him. He wanted to demand answers, but he understood the danger of speaking too soon. In this place, one wrong word could mark him as guilty of a crime he had not even committed. So he stood still, his eyes shifting only toward the princess. She would not meet his gaze now, her head lowered, her hands trembling against the arms of her seat. Her silence said more than any words could, and the court knew it. The king's hand clenched tightly around his staff, the golden crown upon his head glinting like fire as his eyes swept across the chamber. His booming voice cut through the rising storm. "Enough. Your whispers are like poison in my hall. Speak your suspicions aloud if you dare, but do not crawl like cowards in the shadows." Yet even as he spoke, the murmurs continued, for his authority could silence mouths but not minds. The truth had already taken root, and the court was hungry to uncover it. One bold noble finally stepped forward, his robe dragging across the marble floor as he bowed. His voice was sharp and cold. "My king, forgive my boldness." But the reaction of the princess cannot be ignored. Why does she tremble at the sight of this human? Why do her eyes carry recognition? Surely it cannot be coincidence. "Has your daughter hidden something from us all?" His words cut through the air, and the chamber erupted once more. The princess flinched at the accusation, her lips trembling as though she wished to deny it, but no words left her mouth. The silence of her defense was more dangerous than any confession. Daniel felt his pulse quicken, for he realized that her silence was painting him as guilty. The court would not stop until they pulled the truth from her eyes. Another noble with scarred skin raised his voice, his claws tapping against the marble. "If she hides the truth, then perhaps it is treason. Perhaps the human is her accomplice, a corrupter sent to poison our bloodline. Look at him, standing there as though he belongs. This is no accident. It is fate. A dangerous fate that we must end before it consumes us." His words were met with nods from several of the council, their eyes narrowing upon Daniel, Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to remain calm. He could feel the walls of suspicion closing in. He was a stranger here, an outsider, and yet somehow he was now at the center of a storm he could not understand. He thought of speaking, of explaining himself again. But before he could open his mouth, the princess finally moved. Her voice, though trembling, broke through the chaos. "Stop! Do not speak for me." Her words struck the court like thunder. For the first time since his arrival, every noble fell silent, every gaze turned back to her. The princess rose slowly from her seat, her gown shimmering like liquid starlight as it caught the glow of the twin suns filtering through the stained glass above. She looked fragile and strong all at once, her voice soft but steady as she continued. "This man, this human, he is not what you think. He should not be here, and yet. His presence is not a mistake." The chamber erupted again, but this time it was no longer whispers. It was shouts, accusations thrown like daggers across the hall. Some demanded she explain, others called for the human's death. A few, however, were silent, their eyes not filled with anger but curiosity. They saw the way her voice shook, the way her eyes glistened. They saw that her words carried not just fear, but also sorrow. Daniel's heart raced as he looked at her. His mind screamed with questions, but he knew he could not ask them here, not now. He could only wait. The princess turned her gaze to him at last, her lips parting as though to speak the truth. But before the words could escape, the king slammed his staff against the ground. The chamber shook, and silence fell once more. His voice, deep and filled with fire, cut through the tension. "Enough. This court will not descend into chaos. My daughter will explain herself, and the truth will be known." But the princess lowered her head once more. Her silence returning, her eyes told a story, but her lips refused to give it voice. The nobles grew restless. The guards tightened their hold on their spears, and Daniel felt the ground beneath him tremble with uncertainty. The whispers might have been silenced by force, but they lived on in the minds of every alien present. And as Daniel stood at the center of that storm, he realized that the secret buried in the princess's heart was now closer than ever to being exposed, a secret that might decide his fate, and perhaps the fate of the entire kingdom. The secret in her eyes. The chamber of Veloria's throne room felt like it had turned into a cage. The walls of black stone glowed faintly with runes, but instead of offering light, they seemed to close in on every soul within. The king's booming voice still echoed in the minds of the nobles, demanding truth, demanding loyalty. Yet even after his command, the princess sat silent, her lips sealed, her head bowed, and her hands trembling as though the weight of a hidden truth was crushing her. Daniel's heart beat heavily in his chest. His eyes never left the princess. He did not know why she looked at him with such recognition. He did not know what memory haunted her so deeply, but he could feel something powerful and invisible that bound them together. It was in her gaze, a silent thread of connection that no one else in the chamber could understand. The nobles leaned forward in their seats, whispering once again, though the king had forbidden it. They studied every twitch of her hands, every flicker of her eyes, as though they could pull answers from her silence. Some of them were convinced she was hiding treason. Others whispered of curses and forbidden prophecies. The more she avoided speaking, the deeper their suspicions grew, and the more dangerous Daniel's position became. The princess lifted her head slowly, her eyes shimmering with an emotion that struck Daniel's heart like a blade. There was fear in her gaze, yes, but there was also sorrow, and beneath the sorrow lay something else, a truth she could not reveal. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but instead she whispered only a single phrase so softly that only Daniel could hear it. "Forgive me," the words hit him like thunder. Why would she ask forgiveness? What had she done? What bond did they share that she could not confess? Daniel felt the question burn in his chest, but he dared not speak it aloud, for already the nobles were watching, their suspicion ready to twist any word into a weapon. An elder of the court, his voice as sharp as a blade, leaned upon his staff and hissed toward the throne. "My king, her silence is a confession in itself. Look into her eyes, you will see she knows this human. She has seen him before. Why else would she tremble at his presence?" His words fed the fire of suspicion, and the chamber shook with the murmurs of agreement. The king's gaze turned toward his daughter. His eyes narrowed with fury and doubt. "Is this true, child? Speak to your father and deny these whispers. Tell me this human is nothing to you. Say it, and I will strike silence upon these serpents." His voice was thunder, his command absolute, yet the princess's lips trembled, and still no words came. Her silence was more dangerous than any admission. Daniel felt his body tense as the weight of every gaze shifted toward him. He could almost hear their thoughts, accusing him, condemning him. He wanted to shout that he had done nothing, that he had never known this princess before, but when he looked at her again, he could not speak the lie, for something deep in her eyes told him that they had crossed paths in a way he could not yet remember. The princess's gaze softened for just a moment, as if she were pleading with him not to reveal what she could not. Her eyes glistened with tears, her breath uneven, and Daniel understood that she was fighting a battle within her own soul. She wanted to tell the truth, but the truth would destroy her. He could see it, he could feel it, and in that silent exchange, a story was written between them that no words could capture. The chamber grew restless again. The nobles rose from their seats, some calling for the human's immediate execution, others demanding that the princess be stripped of her title until she confessed. The guards moved closer, their spears glinting in the light, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Yet, through the storm of voices, Daniel focused only on her eyes. The princess finally rose from her seat, her gown flowing around her like starlight. Her voice trembled, but it carried across the chamber. He is not supposed to be here," she said, her words heavy with a meaning no one else could understand. "His presence is dangerous, for it awakens what should have remained buried." Gasps filled the hall. The whispers became a roar, and the king's eyes widened in disbelief. "What awakens, daughter?" the king demanded, his staff striking the ground. "What truth do you speak? Tell us now, or your silence will condemn us all." But the princess closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks, and whispered again so softly only Daniel could hear. "I cannot tell them. They will never forgive me. They will never forgive us." Daniel's blood ran cold at her words. He did not know what truth she carried, but he knew in that moment that their fates were bound together. The secret she held was not hers alone. It belonged to him as well, even if he did not yet understand why. The chamber roared with fury and suspicion, but all he could see was her trembling hands, her glistening eyes, her silent plea, and in her eyes, the whole truth was there. A truth too dangerous to speak. A truth that could shatter the kingdom if it were ever revealed. The forbidden past. The silence after the princess's trembling words weighed upon the throne room like a heavy shroud. The nobles had grown restless. Their whispers had turned into harsh accusations, and the king's fury burned in his eyes as he stared down at his daughter. Yet, through the noise and suspicion, one figure slowly stepped forward, his ancient frame leaning on a staff carved with runes older than the palace itself. This was Elder Veyron, the oldest and most respected voice of the council. His memory stretched back longer than most had lived, and his wisdom carried the power to sway even kings. The elder's voice rasped like dry leaves in the wind, yet every syllable carried a weight that silenced the chamber. "I have seen this before," he said slowly, his sharp eyes scanning the hall. "I remember a day when the princess vanished from the palace. She was young then, barely past her childhood, and the kingdom searched desperately for her. For weeks she was gone, and when she returned, she refused to say where she had been." His gaze then fell upon Daniel, and his eyes narrowed like a blade. "And now, she trembles before a human who should not even be alive within these walls. Is this the truth you hide, princess? Did you meet this man long ago? Is he the reason for your silence?" Gasps spread like wildfire across the chamber, the nobles clutching their robes, their eyes wide with shock. For years, the disappearance of the princess had been whispered as a mystery, a wound in the history of the royal family. Some believed she had been kidnapped by enemies. Others claimed she had wandered into forbidden lands. But no one ever knew the truth. And now, with Daniel standing at the center of the storm, suspicion was no longer a shadow but a flame that burned brightly in every eye. The king's hands tightened around his staff, his knuckles white with rage. "Daughter, is this true?" he thundered. "Did you leave this palace to consort with a human? Did you betray your people and your blood?" His voice rolled across the hall like thunder, shaking the golden pillars and silencing every voice. All eyes turned to the princess, her face pale, her eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as though the truth itself was tearing her apart from within. Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing. He had no memory of meeting her, yet her eyes told him otherwise. They held a recognition that could not be denied. They held a bond that no words could explain. And deep in his chest he felt a strange echo, as if some forgotten piece of himself stirred at the sound of the elder's words. He wanted to cry out, to say it was a lie, to protect her, but the weight in her gaze stopped him, for he realized she was fighting not only against her father, but against her entire world. The princess rose from her seat, her gown shimmering in the pale glow of the stained glass above. Her voice was soft, yet it carried through the silence. "I did vanish," she said, "and I did return with a secret I could never share." Her eyes flickered toward Daniel, her breath uneven. "The truth is not betrayal, it is survival. Without him, I would not be standing here before you." Her words sent a shockwave through the chamber. The nobles erupted in chaos, their voices clashing in anger and disbelief. Some shouted that she was confessing to treason. Others demanded that the human be killed at once. The guards tightened their grip on their spears. Their eyes locked on Daniel as though waiting for the order. The king slammed his staff into the marble floor, his roar silencing the uproar. "Explain yourself, daughter. Speak the truth before I strip you of your crown." The princess's hands shook as she pressed them against her chest, her voice breaking as she spoke. "When I disappeared, I wandered into the forbidden lands beyond the crystal plains. I was lost, hunted by the shadows of the deep. My guards abandoned me, my cries went unanswered. I thought I would die, and then—" Her eyes turned once again to Daniel, shimmering with emotion. "He saved me. A human saved me." The words fell into the hall like stones dropped into a still lake. Every ripple of shock spread through the nobles, their disbelief twisting into fear and anger. To them, humans were weak, fragile creatures unworthy of standing beside the alien bloodlines, and yet the princess, heir to the throne, claimed that her very life had been preserved by one. The king's face turned red with fury, his crown blazing with the reflection of the twin suns. "Lies," he roared. "Humans are not saviors, they are parasites. Tell me you did not just speak this falsehood before your people." But the princess did not cower. Her tears glistened as her voice grew stronger. "It is no falsehood, father. He risked his life for me. He carried me when I could no longer walk. He shielded me when the beasts of the dark came. If not for him, your heir would have been lost forever." The hall trembled with the uproar of voices. The nobles' disbelief turned to outrage. Their words filled the air, declaring her words blasphemy, declaring her love for a human as betrayal. Yet, amidst the storm, Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. For her confession was not only truth, but something more. It was the beginning of a fire that would burn through the lies of her people, a fire that could not be extinguished now that it had been spoken. The guards raised their weapons, the king's fury growing as his daughter defied him openly. But the princess stood tall, her body trembling yet her eyes blazing with truth. She had revealed what was once buried in silence. She had confessed the forbidden past. And though the court roared against her, Daniel saw the strength in her eyes, a strength that told him this was only the beginning. For the past had been revealed, and the kingdom would never be the same again. The human's defiance. The throne room of Veloria had turned into a storm of chaos. The nobles shouted with fury, their voices echoing against the golden pillars and ruined walls. The guards advanced slowly, their weapons gleaming under the twin suns that poured through the stained glass above. The king's face was twisted with rage, his voice a thunder that demanded order. But his commands were drowned in the uproar. At the center of it all stood Daniel, the lone human, who now realized he had become the spark of a fire that could no longer be contained. The princess's confession had shaken the very foundation of her people. Her words had turned whispers of suspicion into cries of betrayal. Yet Daniel's heart burned not with fear, but with a quiet fury of his own. He had been silent for too long, enduring the stares, the accusations, the weight of suspicion pressing down upon him like chains. But now, as the guards stepped forward, spears ready to pierce his flesh, he lifted his head and let his voice ring out across the chamber. "I will not run," he said, his voice firm though his heart pounded. "I will not cower before your anger. I have done no wrong. If your princess speaks truth, then I am guilty only of saving a life. If that is a crime in your world, then strike me down now, but do not call it treason. Call it what it is, compassion." The hall fell into a heavy silence at his words. The nobles glared at him with disgust, some with disbelief. Yet not a single one could deny the power of his tone. His words cut through the noise like a blade, and for a moment even the king's booming authority faltered. Daniel's defiance was not born of arrogance, but of conviction, and that conviction carried a weight they were unprepared to face. The king rose slowly from his throne, his towering frame casting a shadow across the marble floor. His staff struck the ground, and sparks of golden fire leapt from its tip. "You dare speak to me of compassion, human?" he thundered. "You stand in the court of Veloria, among bloodlines older than your fragile kind could ever imagine, and you claim your weakness is virtue. Your presence is corruption. Your words are poison. You will die for this insolence." But before the king could order his guards to strike, the princess stepped forward, her gown flowing behind her like liquid starlight. Her voice trembled but carried across the hall with a strength born of desperation. "Father, no, you cannot kill him. He is innocent. He did not come here to destroy us. He came because fate brought him here. And I will not let you stain this hall with his blood." The uproar returned. Louder than before, the nobles shouted that she was bewitched, that her heart had been poisoned by human weakness. Some demanded her removal from the throne. Others begged the king to show no mercy. The guards wavered, their loyalty torn between the command of their king and the defiance of their princess. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, but his voice rose once more, stronger, steadier. "You think me weak because I am human. But weakness is not what kept me alive when I saved your daughter. Weakness is not what carried her through the Forbidden Lands when your own guards abandoned her. Weakness is not what stood against the beasts that hunted her. You call me fragile, yet here I stand before your throne, alive, while those you call strong left her to die." The words struck the court like thunder. The nobles froze, the guards hesitated, and even the king's eyes widened for the briefest of moments. Daniel's defiance had shifted the balance. He was no longer a trespasser standing in silence. He was a voice, a challenge, a human who dared to face an empire of power without bowing. And that defiance carried a truth that not even the king could deny. The princess's eyes filled with tears, but they were no longer tears of fear. They were tears of hope, of courage, as she stepped closer to Daniel. Her voice joined his, trembling but unbroken. "He speaks the truth. He did what no one else could. He stood where your strongest fell, and he gave me life when death had claimed me. If that is weakness, then perhaps weakness is what our world needs." The hall erupted once more, but this time the voices were divided. Some still cried for blood, their rage burning too deep to be swayed. But others fell silent, their eyes turning thoughtful, their hearts touched by the courage in both the human's defiance and the princess's confession. Doubt crept into their anger, a dangerous crack in the foundation of their fury. The king roared again, slamming his staff to silence them. "You dare defy me, both of you. You dare speak against the will of Veloria in my hall." His eyes burned with fury, but deep within them a flicker of uncertainty glimmered. For though he despised the words of the human, he could not erase the truth they carried. Daniel stepped forward, meeting the king's gaze without flinching. "Kill me if you must," he said. "But know this, the truth cannot be buried. Your daughter knows it, I know it, and now your people know it too. You can silence me, but you cannot silence her eyes. They tell a story you cannot erase." The princess gasped softly at his words, her hand reaching instinctively toward him. The court held its breath, the nobles torn between outrage and disbelief. The king trembled with fury, his staff crackling with golden fire. Yet even in his rage he knew the human was right. The truth had been spoken, and it could not be undone. The air grew heavy, the chamber silent except for the beating of hearts. Daniel stood tall, the princess at his side, and together their defiance filled the hall with a strength greater than fear, a strength that shook the throne itself. For the human had stood against an empire and had not bowed, and in his defiance, the princess found her voice, and in her voice, the future of Veloria began to change. The shattered throne. The throne of Veloria trembled, not because the golden stone cracked or the runes dimmed, but because the authority that had once seemed unbreakable was now questioned for the first time in living memory. The king sat upon his high seat with fury in his eyes, but even he could not ignore the silent doubt spreading across the faces of the nobles and the guards. What had once been a court united under fear and tradition was now splintering, and the fracture had begun with the voice of a single human and the trembling truth of his daughter. The chamber was thick with tension. The guards who had raised their weapons toward Daniel now stood frozen, their eyes flickering between the king's wrath and the princess's desperate defiance. The nobles shouted, but their voices were no longer united. Some still cried for blood, demanding the human's death, while others muttered in confusion, their certainty crumbling as they recalled the sincerity in the princess's eyes and the strength in the human's words. For the first time, the foundation of Veloria's power did not seem so unshakable. The king slammed his staff upon the marble floor, golden sparks leaping into the air like fireflies. "Enough!" he thundered, his voice rolling across the chamber like thunder over mountains. "I will not see my hall turned into a pit of cowards and traitors. This throne is eternal, this crown unyielding, and no human, no weakness will break what has endured for millennia." His words burned with fury, yet beneath the power of his voice was a tremor of desperation. The king was not only fighting against the defiance of his daughter and the human, he was fighting against the slow collapse of his own control. The princess stepped forward, her gown trailing like liquid light across the floor. Her voice rose, trembling but filled with resolve. "Father, you speak of strength, but what strength is it to deny the truth? What strength is it to rule through fear and silence? True strength is in facing what you wish to hide, and you cannot hide him. Not anymore. The people see him, and they see me, and they will not forget." Her eyes blazed, her tears drying as her courage grew, and her words struck like a hammer against the fragile walls of tradition. The court erupted once again. Nobles pointed, shouted, cursed. Some accused her of treason. Others demanded she be stripped of her title. But there were those whose eyes softened, who could not help but see the fire of truth within her. Their world had been shaken, and even if they wanted to deny it, they could not unhear her words, nor unsee the bond between her and the human who stood beside her with unwavering defiance. Daniel felt the weight of every gaze, but he did not flinch. His chest rose and fell steadily as he stepped closer to the princess, standing at her side as though daring anyone to tear him away. "You say your throne is eternal," Daniel said, his voice calm but sharp. "But no throne is eternal if it is built upon lies. You say your crown is unyielding, but no crown survives when its people turn their hearts against it. You fear me because I am human, but I am not the danger here. The danger is the truth you refuse to face, the truth your daughter carries, the truth her eyes cannot hide." Gasps filled the hall. The human had not only defied the king but challenged the throne itself. Such words should have condemned him instantly, yet the room did not erupt into violence. The guards still hesitated, the nobles still argued, and the king, though shaking with rage, did not give the order. For even he felt the dangerous shift in the air, the shift that came when fear gave way to doubt. The princess's voice joined Daniel's, her words cutting through the chaos. "You fear him because he represents everything you deny. You call humans weak, yet he stood where your strongest failed. You call them fragile, yet he endured where others would have fallen. Father, do you not see? He does not weaken me. He strengthens me. And if that is betrayal, then I will stand guilty. But I will not be silent anymore." Her declaration shattered the chamber. The nobles recoiled, some in horror, others in awe. The guards tightened their grip but did not move, and the king's hands shook upon his staff. His throne, the symbol of his power, no longer seemed immovable. The voices of his people were no longer united. His daughter no longer obedient. His hall no longer a place of unquestioned control. The king roared in fury, but the sound no longer carried the same weight. His voice was met with resistance, not obedience. His eyes blazed as he looked upon his daughter and the human. But even he could not silence the truth reflected in the eyes of those around him. The throne of Veloria had not been broken by armies, nor shattered by war. It had been shaken by love, by defiance, by truth. And now, though it still stood, its cracks were clear for all to see. Daniel stood taller, his hand brushing against the princess's as though to anchor her. He spoke softly, but the words carried farther than the king's roar. You cannot silence what has already been seen. You cannot unmake what has already begun. This throne may still stand, but it is no longer whole, and it will never be whole again. The princess looked at him with trembling resolve, her heart torn between fear and courage. She knew his words were true. The throne was shattered, not in stone, but in spirit. The people had seen weakness where once there was only power. They had seen humanity where once there was only alien pride. And though the king would not admit it, the world of Veloria had already changed. The silence that followed was heavier than the uproar that had come before. The throne still gleamed in gold. The crown still burned with fire. But its strength had been broken, and everyone in that hall knew it. Her eyes told the whole truth. The throne room stood in heavy silence. The golden light from the twin suns streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the chamber in red and gold hues. Yet that light seemed dim compared to the fire burning in the princess's eyes. The king sat upon his throne, his staff glowing faintly as if ready to strike, his face twisted with rage, his voice trembling with the weight of 1,000 generations of pride. Around him the nobles shifted restlessly, their voices hushed, for they could sense that the fate of their kingdom hung upon the next few words. Daniel stood tall beside the princess, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. He had defied an empire, faced accusations, and stood against the wrath of a king, yet still he did not bow. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with the certainty that the moment had come. The truth that had been buried for years was about to surface, and no crown, no staff, no throne could stop it. The king's voice cut through the silence, sharp and merciless. Speak, daughter, or lose the name of heir forever. Speak and tell us why you tremble for this human. Speak and confess what you have hidden, or I will see your bloodline severed this very day. His words echoed like thunder across the hall, shaking the nobles to silence. The weight of his command was final. Yet, even as his fury threatened to consume her, the princess did not cower. She lifted her head, her tears glistening in the golden light, and looked not at her father, but at Daniel. Her voice trembled at first, fragile as glass, but with each word it grew stronger. I cannot stay silent, not any more, she said. You demand truth, father, then truth I will give, but it will not be the truth you desire. The hall held its breath, every noble frozen, every guard tense, for her words had taken the chamber beyond the point of no return. The princess stepped forward, her gown flowing across the marble like a river of light. She stood between her father's throne and the human at her side, and in that moment her eyes told the story that her lips had long been forced to hide. When I was young, I strayed beyond the crystal plains. I was lost, I was hunted, I was abandoned by those sworn to protect me. I would have died, forgotten in the shadows of the forbidden lands, but it was not my people who saved me. It was him, a human. He carried me when I was broken. He shielded me when the monsters came. He gave me life when death had claimed me. That is the truth. The hall erupted into gasps and cries of outrage. But the princess raised her hand and silenced them with a single glance. Her voice rose higher, filled with fire. You call humans weak, yet your strongest failed me. You call them fragile, yet he endured what they could not. You call them parasites, Yet he gave of himself without asking for reward. And now you call him a trespasser, a corrupter. But I call him my Savior. I call him my bond. I call him my truth. Daniel's chest tightened as her words struck the chamber like lightning. He had felt the bond between them, but hearing it spoken with such force filled him with both awe and sorrow, for he knew her words would cost her everything. Yet she did not falter. Her eyes burned with defiance, and in them the whole truth lived, a truth too powerful to be silenced. The king rose from his throne, his body shaking, his crown blazing with fire. "Enough," he roared. "You dare defy your king. You dare spit upon your bloodline and bring shame to your house. You would throw away 1,000 years of honor for the sake of a human. You are no daughter of mine. You are no heir to my throne." His voice thundered across the hall. Yet, even in his fury, he could not erase the words she had spoken, nor the truth that had been seen in her eyes. The nobles erupted again, divided more than ever before. Some shouted for her punishment, others called for Daniel's death. But there were voices, quiet at first, then louder, that spoke of her courage, that questioned the strength of a king who denied the truth. The court that had once been united under fear was now splintered beyond repair, and no command of the king could piece it back together. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "You can strip her of her crown, you can curse my name, but you cannot change what has already been seen. Her eyes tell the truth, and every soul in this hall has witnessed it. The throne is not broken because of me. It is broken because you refuse to see what your own daughter has shown you." The princess turned to him, her eyes shimmering with both sorrow and resolve. She reached out and took his hand in her own, the gesture small but powerful, a gesture that no one in the hall could ignore. In that touch was defiance. In that touch was loyalty. In that touch was love. The king's fury could burn like fire, but their bond was a flame that even fire could not consume. The silence stretched once more, heavy and unyielding. The nobles looked between their king and their princess, between the fury of the crown and the courage of the heir. The chamber no longer belonged to the king alone. It belonged to the truth, a truth written in the princess's trembling voice, in the human's steady defiance, and above all, in the unshakable story told by her eyes. And as the twin suns sank lower beyond the horizon, casting long shadows across the shattered hall, the future of Veloria shifted forever. The throne still stood, the king still lived, but the world had changed. For a single human had entered their gates, and the princess's eyes had told the truth no one could unsee. Her eyes told the whole truth, and nothing in Veloria would ever be the same again.